Hi, I'm David Askander, Managing Attorney of Askander Law Firm. The subject I'm asked most often about in my practice is living trust. There are a lot of questions and even some confusion about the subject. So today, we're going to talk about living trust. So first off, the obvious question, what is a living trust? Well, before we dive into that, let's first talk about estate planning. Simply put, estate planning is deciding in advance what will happen to your assets should you ever be incapacitated or pass away. You may be asking, okay, but why do I need an estate plan? Don't my assets just transfer over to my heirs or my family or my children once I die? Well, technically, yes. Your home, your business, your bank accounts, and really anything that you own at the time of your passing will eventually pass on to your heirs or next of kin, but not before they have to endure a process known as probate. And probate is when the courts get involved and the courts analyze your assets and eventually distribute them to your heirs. Essentially, the courts are doing what you could have done and probably should have done before your death or incapacity, deciding what will happen to your assets. And like anything having to do with the courts and lawyers, the process can be very lengthy and very expensive. Just for some context, in California, it's not unusual that the probate process can take, for even a modest estate, well over a year and cost tens of thousands of dollars. And that's where living trusts enter the picture. Probably the best and easiest way to avoid probate is by establishing a living trust. A living trust is a legal document that lets you distribute the possessions to the people and organizations that you choose after you die. It's probably easier to think of a living trust as a container. And in that container, you'll place your most valuable assets. Like your home will go into the container, your business, your bank accounts, your personal possession like your jewelry, or anything else that you hold deeply valuable. So instead of those assets being in your name, they will be owned by the trust that you also own. The main benefit of putting your most valuable assets into a living trust is control. A trust gives you complete control during your lifetime and after your passing, so that you can make distributions and decisions according to your desires, as opposed to the will of the courts or the state. So let's dive in a little bit deeper and answer some common questions about living trusts. So first question, I don't have many assets. Do I even need a living trust? Something I tell my clients often is if you own a home, then a trust is a must. But the truth is, even if you don't own a home and you don't want your heirs to struggle through probate, then a living trust may be the best fit for you. A living trust also offers some serious cost savings when compared to a probate. The cost of establishing a trust is literally a fraction of what probate will ultimately cost if you're not prepared. Also, it's important to keep in mind that when you send your estate to probate, your privacy will be violated. Probate means a list of your assets will be easily accessed by the general public. If you want to keep the contents of your estate between you and your beneficiaries, then a living trust is right for you. So for a quick summary, there are three main benefits to a living trust. Number one, complete control. Number two, cost savings. And number three, confidentiality. What's the difference between a will and a trust? A will and a trust are similar in that they both plan for the distribution of assets once someone has passed. But where they differ is that a trust plans for that period of life when you're alive, but you're incapacitated, meaning you aren't able to make health and financial decisions for yourself. A living trust provides for the management and ownership of only the assets you specifically place into it. A trust is designed to function during your life and after your death. A will provides for the distribution of all of your assets upon your death. It only provides instructions for what will happen to your assets after you die. And with a will, you're obligated to go through probate, but with a trust, you completely avoid it. Who are the main characters of a living trust? There's three main characters when discussing living trust that we have to pay attention to. Number 1 is the trust maker. Number 2 is the trustee. And number 3 is the beneficiary. The trust maker. The trust maker, that's the person who's creating the trust. When we talked about our example of a container, that's the person that's creating the container. That's the trust maker. The trustee, they're responsible for managing whatever's inside of that container. And the beneficiary, they get to enjoy and receive the benefit of whatever's inside of that container. So the trust maker, the trustee, and the beneficiary can all be the same person. You are the trust maker who's responsible for creating that container. You are the trustee that's responsible for managing whatever's in the container, and you're also the beneficiary that you receive the benefit and enjoy whatever's in that container. You're all three, you just wear 3 different hats. One of the added benefits too is that you can also say, hey, who's gonna be the manager or the successor trustee at some point in time? So let's just use an example. Let's say you have 3 kids, and 2 of the kids are not very financially responsible, but one of the children is very financially responsible. And you can designate that child to be the successor trustee or the person that's gonna manage the trust after you. So all 3 children can be the beneficiaries, but only one is gonna be the trustee. This is just one example of the type of control that a trust offers. So how often should I update my trust? Listen, life comes with many changes. Whenever you have a big change in your life or changes to your assets, you should be updating your estate plan. These are some examples to include. If you're buying or selling a home, you're purchasing another large estate, you're starting or selling a business, birth or adoption of a child or grandchild, marriage or divorce, death of a family member involved in your estate. For example, if one of your beneficiaries or successor trustee has passed away, you'd want to update your trust. Or just generally, every few years, you want to make sure everything is current and updated. What property can go into a living trust? With very few exceptions, any of your property can be placed into your living trust. The more property you place into the trust, the more beneficial that trust will be. Who should be your trustee? Most people name themselves as trustee so they can manage the trust assets during their lifetime. You can choose anyone or even a professional trustee if you prefer. If you name yourself, you will need to name a successor trustee who can step up to manage the trust after your passing. Can I make changes to my trust? During the trust maker's lifetime, they can make as many changes or modifications to the trust. That's why it's called a revocable living trust. We do this through a process called amendments. If there are too many changes, sometimes we need to do something called a restatement, where we restate the entire trust. But yes, a living trust is revocable at any time before your passing. After your passing, the living trust becomes irrevocable because you can't make any changes at that time. How do I fund my trust? Establishing a trust is really a 2-step process. Step 1 is creation of the trust. And then step 2 is funding that trust. So that example that we used earlier of creating a container, step 1 is we create the container, and step 2 is we need to put things inside of that container, which are the assets that you want transferred into the trust. This is done by retitling assets into the name of the trust, so that the trust is the owner of those assets. If you're interested in establishing a trust or doing any sort of estate planning, please feel free to reach out to our office. We'd love to help. Most people assume that a trust is something that's either unnecessary or out of reach for them. The truth is, establishing a trust is both more affordable and beneficial than most people realize.